The crowd erupted as Zora Richards stood trembling before the packed courthouse, her voice finally breaking through after months of being silenced. When Officer Cunningham lifted my skirt in Blackstone Park, he thought I was just another black woman he could humiliate with impunity. The courtroom fell silent as she locked eyes with her attackers. What they never expected was that I would fight back, or that fighting back would cost me everything I love. If only she had known then that calling her father would ignite a war she might not survive. Can justice truly exist in a system designed to protect its own? Before we begin this shocking true story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in fighting for justice no matter the cost, hit that like and subscribe button, because tomorrow's special episode reveals what really happens when powerful institutions close ranks against one determined woman. Sunday afternoons in Blackstone Park were Zora Richards' sanctuary. The 28-year-old Northwestern law professor spread her students' papers across the weathered wooden bench, red pen in hand, lost in constitutional arguments and legal precedents. The spring breeze rustled through dogwood blossoms, creating a tranquil backdrop for her grading ritual. She hardly noticed the police cruiser that pulled up nearby until two officers approached with purposeful strides. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," Officer Brett Cunningham announced, hand resting on his holster. His partner, Officer Derek Mathers, positioned himself to block any potential exit route. "We've had reports of drug activity in this area, and you fit the description of our suspect." Zora looked up, confused. "What description exactly?" she asked. Mathers smirked. "Female, black, in her 20s? That's you, isn't it?" Zora's spine stiffened as she recognized the familiar pattern. There was no suspect that matched her appearance. This was harassment, plain and simple. "I'm just grading papers," she explained, gesturing to the stack of essays. "I'm a law professor at Northwestern." Her credentials only seemed to agitate them further. "Stand up, please," Cunningham ordered. "We need to check you for weapons and contraband." Zora stood, clutching her belongings, keenly aware of other park visitors beginning to stare. What happened next would replay in her nightmares for months. Officer Cunningham circled behind her and deliberately used his baton to lift the back of her skirt, exposing her underwear to everyone in the vicinity. "Just being thorough," he remarked as Officer Mathers laughed. "Nice choice today," Mathers added with a leer. "Black lace, how appropriate." White-hot humiliation burned through Zora as park visitors either turned away in discomfort or pulled out phones to record the incident. She tried to maintain her composure, summoning every ounce of her legal knowledge. "This is a clear violation of my Fourth Amendment rights," she stated firmly. "You have no probable cause for a search, especially not one conducted in this degrading manner." The officers exchanged amused glances. "Oh, we got a lawyer here," Cunningham mocked. "Always the educated ones who give us trouble." He grabbed her wrist roughly. "Put your hands behind your back. You're interfering with a police investigation." The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her skin as Zora fought to keep her voice steady. "I want your badge numbers, and I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." More onlookers had gathered now, some openly recording. Mathers began approaching them, demanding they delete the videos. "Police investigation, no recording allowed." Desperation welled up in Zora as she realized these officers would face no consequences unless she leveraged a power they would respect. "Before this goes any further," she said, her voice cutting through their smug satisfaction, "you should know my father is Chancellor Richards, Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court." The change was immediate and dramatic. Officer Cunningham's grip loosened. Officer Mathers turned back from harassing the witnesses. "Chief Justice Richards is your father." Cunningham's voice had lost its edge. "Why didn't you say so?" Zora pulled her phone from her bag. "I'm calling him now. I'd suggest you both prepare to explain your actions." As she dialed, the officers began a hasty retreat, uncuffing her while spouting justifications. "Standard procedure, ma'am. No harm. Intended. Just doing our job. Public safety concerns." They moved quickly to the witnesses, more insistent now about deleting videos. Zora connected with her father, describing the incident in precise, measured tones that belied her inner turmoil. As she spoke, she watched the officers' growing panic, their hushed, urgent conversations, their increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative by confiscating phones. Inside, Zora struggled with conflicting emotions. Using her father's position felt like admitting she couldn't succeed on merit alone, that justice required connections. Yet the alternative was allowing these officers to continue their pattern of abuse unchecked. As she described the lifted skirt, the mockery, the handcuffs, her father's silence spoke volumes. Then came his single question. Badge numbers? The path ahead would not be simple. Zora didn't yet realize that this moment of humiliation would spiral into a battle that would test not just her resolve but her very identity as a black woman, a legal scholar, and a daughter of power. Chancellor Richards arrived at Blackstone Park with the police commissioner in tow, his tall frame and judicial gravitas creating an immediate impact. The commissioner, a political appointee clearly uncomfortable with the situation, assured both Zora and her father that the matter would be handled with the utmost seriousness. Officers Cunningham and Mathers have been suspended with pay pending a full investigation, he announced, avoiding Zora's direct gaze. Internal Affairs will conduct a thorough review. The words sounded reassuring, but something in the commissioner's demeanor left Zora uneasy. Her father squeezed her shoulder. Justice will be served, he said, with the conviction of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms. Yet even as Zora nodded, she wondered if true justice could come from within the very system that had violated her. The following day, Zora sat across from Detective Ellis, the Internal Affairs investigator assigned to her case. His office was sparse, institutional, with fluorescent lights that made her feel as though she were being interrogated rather than heard. "Walk me through what happened again," Ellis said, pen poised over his notepad. Zora recounted the events, with precision, but as she described Officer Cunningham lifting her skirt, she noticed Ellis's slight frown. "And what were you wearing at the time?" he asked. Zora paused, recognizing the subtle shift toward victim-blaming. "A knee-length skirt and blouse, but my clothing is irrelevant to whether an officer had the right to expose my underwear in public." Ellis made a note. "Just establishing all the facts, Professor Richards." When she mentioned the park visitors who had recorded the incident, Ellis nodded. "Yes, we've collected those videos as evidence." Yet when Zora asked to view them, his expression clouded. "Unfortunately, there seems to be some technical issue with the files. They appear to be corrupted." "All of them?" Zora asked incredulously. "From multiple devices," Ellis shrugged. "Digital evidence can be problematic." As the interview continued, Zora became increasingly aware that the questions seemed designed to undermine her account rather than corroborate it. Why had she been alone in the park? Had she been drinking? Had she had previous encounters with these officers? Had she ever made complaints against law enforcement before? Days later, Zora learned from one of the park witnesses that they had been contacted by Internal Affairs. "They kept asking if I was sure about what I saw," the young woman told Zora by phone. "They said the officers reported you were aggressive and uncooperative, and maybe I had misinterpreted what happened from a distance." Similar reports came from other witnesses, all describing subtle pressure to revise their statements. When Zora called Detective Ellis for an update, his response was clipped. "The investigation is ongoing. These things take time." 2 weeks passed, then 3. Finally, a letter arrived informing her that the investigation had concluded there was insufficient evidence of misconduct to warrant disciplinary action. Officers Cunningham and Mathers would be reinstated following additional training in community relations. Zora stormed into Ellis's office, letter in hand. "This is absurd. Multiple witnesses saw what happened. How can there be insufficient evidence?" Ellis wouldn't meet her eyes. "Professor Richards, I understand your frustration, but without clear video evidence and with conflicting witness statements, we simply cannot establish misconduct beyond department standards." A nameplate on his desk caught Zora's attention. "Det. James Ellis, 20 years of service." Something clicked. "You worked in the 8th Precinct before Internal Affairs, didn't you?" The slight stiffening of Ellis's shoulders confirmed her suspicion. "You were Officer Cunningham's partner for 5 years. Ellis stood abruptly. "This interview is over, Professor. The department has made its determination. Zora left the police headquarters with clarity she hadn't possessed before. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed, protecting its own at all costs. Her father called that evening. "I've heard their decision," he said, his voice heavy. "We can appeal to the Civilian Review Board." But Zora had already made her decision. "No, Dad. I'm filing a formal civil rights complaint, and I'm taking this to the media." The silence on the line conveyed his concern. "Zora, you need to understand what you're up against. These institutions protect themselves fiercely. The danger isn't just to your case, but to you personally." "I understand perfectly," she replied. "That's exactly why I have to fight. If they can do this to the daughter of a Chief Justice, imagine what happens to women without my privilege." As she hung up, Zora didn't yet comprehend how prophetic her father's warning would prove to be, or how high the personal cost of pursuing justice would climb. Jasmine Turner, a veteran reporter for the Boston Globe, listened intently as Zora detailed her experience in Blackstone Park. The journalist's office walls were covered with awards for investigative reporting, giving Zora hope that her story would finally be told accurately and completely. "This isn't just about what happened to me," Zora explained. "It's about a pattern of behavior these officers have likely inflicted on numerous women who lacked the resources to fight back." Turner nodded, recording every word. "I'll need statements from witnesses, copies of the IA report, anything you can provide to corroborate." 2 days later, when the article appeared, Zora stared at it in disbelief. The headline read, "Judges, Daughter Claims Police Misconduct," immediately casting doubt on her account. The details of Officer Cunningham lifting her skirt were buried in the 10th paragraph, characterized as an alleged inappropriate search. The officer's version received equal space, describing Zora as confrontational and uncooperative with routine questioning. Turner's apologetic phone call came minutes later. "The editors gutted it, Zora. Said we needed balance and had to protect the paper from potential liability." The story might have ended there if not for an anonymous online account that posted a partial video of the incident. Though the clip began after the skirt lifting, it clearly showed Zora handcuffed while officers intimidated witnesses. Social media erupted. Being justice for Zora began trending locally, then nationally. But the backlash came swiftly and mercilessly. The Boston Police Union issued a formal statement defending the officers. In an era of increasing threats to public safety, Officers Cunningham and Mathers followed standard protocols for suspicion of narcotics activity. Professor Richards' academic credentials do not exempt her from lawful police procedures. Conservative media outlets pounced. "Privileged elite plays race card against Boston's finest," blared one headline. A popular pundit devoted 10 minutes of his show to dissecting Zora's past. Her participation in Black Lives Matter protests during law school, her academic papers on racial disparities in criminal sentencing, her guest lectures on police reform. "This so-called victim has a long history of anti-police activism," he declared. Is it any wonder she'd fabricate an incident to further her radical agenda? The emails began flooding her university account. Some expressed support, but many contained vicious attacks and threats. "They should have done more than lift your skirt," wrote one anonymous sender. "Maybe next time they will." Zora forwarded the threats to campus security, who promised to monitor the situation. But when she arrived at her office the next morning, she found the door plastered with printouts of her social media photos, defaced with racial slurs. The university's response was tepid at best. An official statement expressed concern for Professor Richards' well-being, while emphasizing that Northwestern University respects the difficult work of law enforcement professionals. When Zora met with her department chair, Professor Lawrence, his discomfort was palpable. "The timing of this is unfortunate," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Enrollment for next semester is already underway, and I've noticed your constitutional law course has seen a significant drop in registration." "I'm being targeted because I spoke up about police misconduct," Zora countered. "Shouldn't the university be defending academic freedom and faculty safety?" Lawrence cleared his throat. "Perhaps a temporary leave of absence might be beneficial for everyone. Give things time to settle down. That evening, researching university donors for leverage, Zora discovered a $2 million annual grant from the Boston Police Foundation to Northwestern's criminal justice program. The connections were everywhere, invisible until you knew to look for them. The most devastating blow came a week later when a local news website published excerpts from her private medical records revealing she had sought therapy for anxiety and depression following her mother's death 3 years earlier. The headline was brutal. Richard's history of mental health issues raises questions about police allegations. Zora knew immediately this was no random leak. Only the police department's background check would have accessed those records during their investigation. The message was clear. They could reach into every corner of her life. Nothing was sacred, nothing was safe. Would you stand firm if powerful institutions invaded your most private spaces? Comment number 1. If you believe medical records should be strictly confidential, or number 2, if you think public safety concerns might justify such intrusions. While you ponder that impossible choice, hit like and subscribe to follow Zora's battle against a system determined to silence her. How far would you go to expose corruption if it meant risking everything you've worked for? The answer might not be as simple as you think. Madison Carter's law office exuded confidence, with its gleaming hardwood floors and walls adorned with framed court victories. The prominent civil rights attorney had taken on police departments across 3 states and won substantial settlements for victims of misconduct. Your case is textbook civil rights violation, Carter said, reviewing Zora's documentation. 4th Amendment search and seizure, equal protection clause, clear evidence of racial bias. We'll file in federal court to bypass local influences. The lawsuit named Officers Cunningham and Mathers individually, their supervising lieutenant, the police commissioner, and the city of Boston as defendants. The complaint detailed not just the Blackstone Park incident, but the subsequent cover-up, the media manipulation, and the intimidation campaign. We're seeking not just damages but structural reforms, Carter explained. Body cameras with civilian oversight, revised search protocols, independent investigation of misconduct complaints. Zora felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. The legal system had failed her as a victim, but perhaps it would vindicate her as a plaintiff. That hope dimmed considerably when she learned their case had been assigned to Judge William Preston, a former prosecutor known for his law enforcement-friendly rulings. This is problematic, Carter admitted during their prep meeting. Preston dismisses excessive force claims at nearly 3 times the rate of other judges in the district. Further research revealed Preston had received substantial support from police union PACs during his appointment process. Carter filed a motion for recusal, citing conflict of interest. Your Honor, she argued in court, the appearance of impartiality is as important as impartiality itself. The significant financial support Judge Preston received from the defendants creates precisely such an appearance issue. Judge Preston's face remained impassive. Motion denied. The court finds no substantive conflict that would prevent fair adjudication. That night, Zora returned to her apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart pounding, she called building security before entering. Nothing appeared to be stolen, but her files had been rifled through, papers strewn across the floor. Her laptop remained untouched on the desk, but when she opened it, the hard drive had been wiped clean. The message was as clear as it was untraceable. We can reach you anywhere. The next morning brought another blow. Carter called in a panic. There was a break-in at our offices last night. The security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned for a 3-hour window. They took nothing except the evidence files for your case. Zora gripped the phone tightly. I have backups. That's just it, Carter replied. Our secure server was also breached. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for and how to find it. They scrambled to reconstruct the case file, reaching out again to witnesses. But the landscape had shifted dramatically. Tamika Johnson, whose cell phone video had captured critical moments after the handcuffing, now refused to testify. I can't help you, she whispered when Zora called. They arrested my brother last night on an outstanding warrant from 5 years. Ergo, a parking ticket they say he never paid. They'll drop the charges if I correct my mistaken recollection of what happened in the park. One by one, witnesses disappeared. Some stopped answering calls. Others formally recanted their statements. By the time their preliminary hearing arrived, half their evidence had evaporated. Still, Carter was a fighter. We have enough to proceed. The pattern of intimidation itself becomes part of our case. But when they submitted their amended complaint, Judge Preston found numerous procedural deficiencies requiring dismissal. Your pleadings fail to establish the necessary elements for municipal liability, he lectured from the bench. Furthermore, the electronic submission appears to be incomplete, with several exhibits referenced but not included. Carter was stunned. Your Honor, we verified those submissions personally. All exhibits were properly uploaded to the court system. A court clerk pulled Carter aside after the hearing. Someone accessed the case file using the judge's credentials. Last night, she murmured. I'm not supposed to know that, and I definitely didn't tell you. The final attack came directly at Carter herself. The State Bar Association notified her of an ethics investigation based on anonymous complaints of witness coaching and evidence fabrication in Zora's case. They're trying to destroy my license, Carter admitted during a tense strategy session. I hate this, but I need to withdraw as counsel. If I'm disbarred, I can't help anyone. Zora understood. The system wasn't just protecting itself, it was systematically eliminating anyone who challenged it. As she left Carter's office for the last time, Zora noticed a glossy brochure on the reception desk. Crisis Management Solutions. Inc. Making Problems Disappear. The logo matched a subsidiary of a major corporate donor to the police union. The connections were everywhere, a vast web designed to entangle anyone who struggled against it. But webs had weak points, and Zora was determined to find them. The email from Northwestern University's Ethics Committee arrived on a Tuesday morning, its formal language barely concealing the threat beneath. The committee has received multiple complaints regarding potential violations of faculty conduct standards. Pending investigation, your teaching duties are suspended effective immediately. Attached were anonymized statements from supposed students claiming Zora had created a hostile classroom environment, demonstrated anti-police bias in lectures, and graded conservatives more harshly. Zora recognized the strategy: isolate, discredit, remove. The same playbook used against witnesses and her attorney was now being deployed in her professional space. She requested an emergency meeting with the full department faculty. These allegations are obviously retaliatory, she argued to her colleagues. They're targeting me because I filed a civil rights case. A few nodded in agreement, but most avoided eye contact. Professor Lawrence spoke for the majority. While we sympathize with your personal situation, the university must take student complaints seriously. The integrity of our institution requires proper procedure. The vote was aye. Add 3 to place her on administrative leave, pending the ethics review. Only 3 colleagues had the courage to stand with her. Their names were duly noted. Within days, Professor Rodriguez, who had spoken most forcefully in Zora's defense, learned his research grant renewal had been unexpectedly denied. Professor Williams, who had offered to cover Zora's classes, was informed her tenure review would be delayed another year due to administrative concerns. The message to faculty was unmistakable: support Richards at your own peril. Zora's isolation extended beyond campus. Her bank called to inform her of suspicious activity on her accounts, freezing her access while they conducted a review. When she applied for a small apartment closer to campus, her application was denied due to character concerns, despite her perfect credit score. Most disturbing was the growing certainty that her communications were being monitored. Her phone developed strange echoes during calls. Emails she sent sometimes appeared in others' inboxes with slight alterations that changed their tone or meaning. Friends gradually stopped calling. Lunch invitations dwindled. Former classmates viewed her as professionally radioactive, too dangerous to associate with. I support you in principle, one colleague texted, but I have kids and a mortgage. I can't risk it. The attack expanded to include her father. A right-wing blog published an expose claiming Chancellor Richards had improperly influenced police department operations on behalf of his daughter. The State Judicial Ethics Committee announced a preliminary review of potential misconduct, the first step toward impeachment proceedings. When Zora visited her father at his home, she was shocked by his appearance. The distinguished jurist looked 10 years older, his face drawn, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. "It's just stress," he insisted when she expressed concern. "Nothing I haven't handled before." But when he reached for his coffee cup, she noticed a slight tremor in his hand. "Dad, I'm thinking about dropping the whole thing," she said, fighting back tears. "It's not worth what they're doing to you, to your legacy." Chancellor Richards straightened in his chair, summoning the judicial authority that had commanded courtrooms for decades. "Zora Alexandra Richards, don't you dare let them win. What they did was wrong. What they're doing now is worse. Justice isn't just a word we use in courtrooms. It's what we fight for when the system fails." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. A courier delivered an unmarked envelope addressed to Zora. Inside was a thick folder labeled Richards Family Investigation, clearly a confidential police document. It contained detailed surveillance reports on both her and her father dating, back months before the park incident. The invasion of privacy was staggering. Later that night, returning to her car outside her apartment, Zora found it vandalized with racial slurs spray-painted across the hood and doors. The side mirrors had been smashed, glass scattered across the pavement. Tucked under the windshield, wiper was an envelope containing photographs. Zora getting coffee at her regular shop. Zora jogging on her usual route. Zora meeting with a potential witness. The unspoken message couldn't have been clearer. "We're watching. We're always watching." Zora leaned against the defaced vehicle, suddenly understanding the true nature of the fight. This wasn't just about one incident in a park anymore. This was about a system so corrupted by power that it would destroy lives, careers, and reputations, rather than acknowledge its failures. The question was no longer whether she could win justice for herself, but whether any form of justice was possible against such a machinery of oppression. The flyer appeared under Zora's door one morning. "Justice Now, Community Action Against Police Brutality, meeting Tuesday, 7 p.m. Listed at the bottom was an address in Roxbury, a predominantly black neighborhood across town. Under normal circumstances, Zora might have ignored an anonymous invitation, but normal had vanished the moment Officer Cunningham lifted her skirt. The community center hummed with energy when Zora arrived. Approximately 30 people, mostly black and Latino, sat in a circle of folding chairs. Signs on the walls documented stories of police violence, names and faces of victims, creating a grim visual record of systemic abuse. A tall man with dreadlocks pulled back in a neat ponytail approached, as she hesitated at the entrance. "Professor Richards," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Jefferson. Thank you for coming." She recognized him from local news coverage of police accountability protests. "How did you find me?" "Your story resonated with our members," he explained, guiding her to an empty chair. "What happened to you in Blackstone Park happens to black women in Boston every day. The difference is you have the platform and resources to fight back." The meeting began with testimonials. One by one, community members described encounters with law enforcement, unwarranted searches, public humiliation, excessive force. Zora was struck by how many mentioned officers Cunningham and Mathers specifically. "They've been terrorizing our neighborhoods for years," explained an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Watkins. "But complaints disappear into thin air. No one with power cares what happens in Roxbury or Dorchester." When Zora's turn came, she shared her experience, including the subsequent retaliation campaign. Nodding heads and murmurs of recognition confirmed that her story, while extreme in its reach, followed a familiar pattern. After the meeting, Marcus outlined Justice Now's proposal. They would help organize protests, connect Zora with other victims, and provide security volunteers to monitor her home and activities. "The department is betting on your isolation," he explained. "They want you alone and afraid. We ensure you're neither." Over the following weeks, Justice Now mobilized with impressive efficiency. Twice-weekly protests outside police headquarters kept Zora's case in the public eye. Community members formed rotating security details for her apartment. Marcus connected her with independent journalists who published unfiltered accounts of both the original incident and the retaliation. Most importantly, Justice Now helped identify and protect other women targeted by Cunningham and Mathers. Strength. In numbers, Marcus explained, they can discredit one victim. 5 is harder. 20 becomes a pattern they can't ignore. Momentum built steadily. Local news outlets that had initially parroted the police narrative began asking harder questions. A city council member called for an independent investigation. The Justice Department sent a preliminary inquiry about potential civil rights violations. For the first time since the park incident, Zora felt the ground shifting. The breakthrough came when Justice Now obtained an internal police memorandum through a source inside the department. The document outlined a specific initiative targeting academics and activists promoting anti-police sentiment, with Zora listed as a priority subject. The memo confirmed what she had experienced: coordinated surveillance, media manipulation, institutional pressure, and intimidation of witnesses. Marcus was ecstatic. "This is exactly what we needed," he told Zora when they met to review the document. "My federal contact says this could trigger a pattern or practice investigation. The whole department would be under Justice Department. Oversight." "Federal contact?" Zora asked, surprised. Marcus nodded. "I've been working with an FBI civil rights investigator for months, building a bigger case on departmental corruption. Your situation could be the tipping point." Hope surged. Through Zora. Perhaps the system could be forced to correct itself, after all, with enough pressure from the outside. Then came the text message from Tamika Johnson, the witness who had previously withdrawn. "Don't trust Marcus. Saw him meeting with police commissioner at Harbor Hotel yesterday. Very friendly. Something wrong." Zora's instinct was to dismiss the warning as paranoia induced by months of gaslighting and betrayal. But she had learned to trust nothing at face value. She hired a private investigator with the last of her savings, instructing him to track Marcus's movements for 3 days. The evidence arrived in her encrypted email on day 2. Photographs of Marcus entering the back door of police headquarters, Marcus having drinks with the police union president, Marcus accepting an envelope from a man identified as the CEO of Crisis Management Solutions. The final betrayal was financial. Bank records showing transfers from a police union front organization to Justice Now's operating account. Everything, from the initial approach to the apparently leaked document, had been an elaborate operation to identify other complainants, monitor Zora's strategy, and create the appearance of community support while controlling its direction. When Zora confronted Marcus with the evidence in the empty community center, his expression shifted from shock to resignation. "It's more complicated than it looks," he offered lamely. "I'm playing both sides to get what our community needs. Sometimes you have to work within the system." "You're not working within the system," Zora replied, her voice steady despite her rage. "You're working for it, against the very people you claim to represent." She turned to leave, then paused. "They own you, Marcus, and you've helped them. Hurt countless others who trusted you." As she walked away, Marcus called after her, "They'll destroy you completely now. You have no idea what they're capable of." Zora didn't turn around. "Actually, I do," she answered, "and I'm still here." The betrayal by Marcus and Justice Now left Zora more isolated than ever, but with clarity that had previously eluded her. The opposition wasn't just individual officers or even the police department. It was an interconnected system designed to protect power at all costs. To fight it, she would need to be strategic, selective, and above all, careful about who she trusted. She began rebuilding her case with a smaller, vetted circle. Professor Williams, despite the threat to her tenure, offered her apartment for secure meetings. Elijah Washington, a former student now working as a public defender, provided legal counsel after Madison Carter's forced withdrawal. Most promising was their discovery of Officer Teresa Rodriguez, a 5-year veteran of the Boston PD who had witnessed years of misconduct by Cunningham, Mathers, and others. "I've been documenting everything," Rodriguez told them during a clandestine meeting in a church basement. "Illegal searches, excessive force, racism, sexual harassment. The department is rotten from the inside out." Rodriguez agreed to testify about the department's cover-up culture, specifically how complaints against Cunningham and Mathers had been systematically buried. Her testimony would establish the pattern of behavior that Zora's legal case required. The night before Rodriguez was scheduled to give her deposition, she texted Zora, "Something's wrong. I think I'm being followed." 3 hours later, breaking. News alerts reported Officer Teresa Rodriguez had been arrested on drug charges after a confidential informant led police to cocaine allegedly hidden in her locker. The setup was transparent, the message undeniable. No one from within the system would be allowed to break ranks. Zora barely had time to process this development before her father called, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "The state legislature has announced an impeachment investigation." The Boston Herald's front page spelled out the details. Ethics Committee to probe Chief Justice Richards' alleged interference in daughter's case. An anonymous complaint had triggered the investigation, claiming Chancellor Richards had improperly pressured the police department to give preferential treatment to Zora after the park incident. The Legislative Oversight Committee issued broad subpoenas for the family's financial records, communications, and Chief Justice Richards's judicial decisions involving law enforcement over his entire career. What they couldn't find, they fabricated. Conservative media outlets reported that sources close to the investigation had revealed Chancellor Richards used his position to quash previous complaints against his daughter, though no such complaints had ever existed. The narrative shifted from police misconduct to judicial corruption, with Zora cast as the privileged beneficiary of her father's improper influence. The pressure took its toll on Chancellor Richards. During a particularly hostile legislative hearing, he struggled to find words, his normally incisive legal mind clouded by stress and exhaustion. Halfway through his testimony, he clutched his left arm, slumping forward in his chair. The stroke was classified as minor, but it left the once imposing jurist weakened and temporarily hospitalized. Zora spent every possible moment at his bedside, consumed by guilt that her pursuit of justice had endangered the person she loved most. "You should drop it all," she told him during one hospital visit. "Your health is more important than my case. We can issue a statement, say there was a misunderstanding." Her father's response was barely above a whisper, but carried the force of a judicial decree. "Never compromise with injustice, Zora, not even for me, especially not for me." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me you'll see this through no matter what happens." Tearfully, she promised. Unknown to either of them, a staff member had recorded their conversation. The next day, heavily edited portions appeared on a right-wing news site, manipulated to suggest Chancellor Richards was orchestrating Zora's legal strategy from his hospital bed, further evidence of judicial interference. The Legislative Committee accelerated its proceedings, voting along party lines to formally begin impeachment. With public opinion turning against them and his health deteriorating, Chancellor Richards made the difficult decision to step down temporarily pending the investigation. His resignation statement emphasized his commitment to judicial integrity and the need to remove any appearance of impropriety. What he didn't say, but Zora understood perfectly, was that he was sacrificing his position to give her case a fighting chance. Watching her father's distinguished career crumble under false accusations, Zora came closest to abandoning her fight. The personal cost seemed too high, the opposition too powerful. For 3 days, she drafted and redrafted a statement, withdrawing her complaints and apologizing for any misunderstanding about the park incident. But each time she prepared to release it, she remembered the other women who had come forward, the ones without her resources or platform. If she surrendered, their stories would be buried alongside hers. And the officers who had humiliated her would continue their pattern of abuse with renewed confidence in their impunity. Has your belief in the system ever been tested? Comment number 1 if you think institutions will eventually correct themselves when enough light is shined on corruption, or number 2 if you believe powerful systems will sacrifice anyone to protect themselves. While you consider that, remember to like and subscribe if you value stories that expose how justice can be twisted against those who seek it. What would you sacrifice to stand up for what's right? When the personal cost becomes unbearable, where do you draw the line? The pounding on her door jolted Zora awake at 4:17 a.m. Before she could fully register what was happening, her apartment door splintered inward. Armed officers in tactical gear swarmed inside, shouting contradictory commands. "Police! Search! Warrant! Hands where we can see them! Get on the ground!" Disoriented and terrified, Zora complied as best she could, her face pressed against the cold hardwood floor as hands roughly secured plastic zip ties around her wrists. Through the chaos, two familiar voices emerged. "Well, look who it is," Officer Cunningham remarked, his tone mockingly casual. "Professor Richards caught with illegal substances, such a disappointment to the academic community." Officer Mathers appeared in her line of sight, holding a small plastic bag of white powder. "Found this in the bathroom cabinet, right where our informant said it would be." He knelt beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Told you we weren't finished, Professor. This is what happens to people who don't know their place." The processing at the police station was deliberately humiliating. Though department protocol required female officers to handle female suspects, Cunningham and Mathers personally conducted her booking, including the invasive search procedures. They accidentally ripped her nightshirt during the process, leaving her exposed in the harsh fluorescent light of the booking area. "Oops," Mathers smirked. "No special treatment for Daddy's little girl today." The booking photo, showing Zora disheveled and shell-shocked, appeared on news websites within hours, accompanied by headlines about the hypocritical academic who criticized police while allegedly hiding narcotics. No mention was made of her ongoing civil rights case against the officers who had discovered the drugs. No context was provided about the timing of the arrest. The presumption of innocence, that cornerstone of American jurisprudence, was noticeably absent from the coverage. Despite repeated requests, Zora was denied her phone call for nearly 12 hours, kept in isolation in a holding cell. When finally permitted to contact someone, she reached Elijah Washington, who immediately began working to secure her release. "This is obviously retaliation and evidence tampering," he assured her. "We'll fight it." But the judge at her arraignment, another known police ally, set bail at an exorbitant $50,000 and required an ankle monitor as a condition of release. "The defendant poses a flight risk due to her connections and resources," he intoned, ignoring Elijah's protests about her deep community ties and lack of criminal history. By the time Zora secured bail, the damage to her reputation was severe and expanding. Northwestern University's president released a statement announcing the initiation of termination proceedings based on the moral turpitude clause in her contract. "The university cannot maintain faculty members whose personal conduct fundamentally contradicts the values we instill in our students," the statement read. Even with physical freedom, Zora's life contracted dramatically. The ankle monitor limited her movements to home, attorney meetings, and court appearances. Each step was tracked, each deviation from approved routes flagged. The isolation was compounded when she learned her father had suffered a setback after hearing about her arrest. His doctors reported elevated blood pressure and concerns about a possible second stroke, recommending against any stressful visitors. The message was clear: she couldn't even see her father without endangering his health. The final blow came when Madison Carter, her original attorney, formally withdrew from all aspects of her civil case. "I can't represent you anymore, Zora," she explained during a brief, tense call. "Not just because of the new criminal charges. They've made it impossible." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They threatened my children, sent photos of my daughter walking home from school along with her class schedule. I can't risk it, I'm sorry." For the first time since the park incident, Zora considered accepting defeat. Perhaps a plea deal on reduced charges would end the nightmare. Perhaps admitting to a crime she hadn't committed was the only way to protect what remained of her father's health and legacy. When Elijah visited to discuss strategy, she broached the possibility. "What if I just plead to a misdemeanor possession charge? Would they drop the felony and let this end?" Elijah studied her with concern. "Is that what you really want?" Before she could answer, he slid a folder across the table. "Before you decide, you should see what I found." Inside was a meticulous record of similar frame-ups dating back 5 years. Officer Cunningham and Mathers had used planted evidence and fabricated informants to target at least 7 other individuals who had filed complaints against them. In each case, the criminal charges had effectively discredited the complaint and forced the victim to abandon their pursuit of accountability. "This isn't just about you anymore," Elijah said quietly. "It's about a systematic abuse of power that's destroyed multiple lives. If someone doesn't stand up to it, it will keep happening." That same evening, a package arrived at Zora's apartment, delivered by courier with no return address. Inside was a USB drive containing what appeared to be internal police communications, planning her arrest in detail, including instructions on where to find the planted drugs and how to maximize media exposure. The anonymous note accompanying it read simply, "Not everyone in the department supports what's happening. Some of us still believe in the oath we took." Staring at the evidence of the deliberate frame-up, Zora made her decision. She wouldn't just fight the false charges, she would use them to expose the entire corrupt machinery behind them. The system had pushed her to rock bottom, believing she would break. Instead, she would use that solid foundation to build something they couldn't tear down. The truth, documented and undeniable, about how power protected itself at the expense of justice. Elijah Washington arrived at Zora's apartment with a young woman whose pink hair and multiple piercings contrasted sharply with her intense, focused demeanor. "This is Alex," he said simply. "She leads Digital Justice, a hacktivist collective that specializes in exposing police misconduct through data recovery." Alex nodded curtly. "Your case has serious security implications. Everything we discuss must remain strictly between us." She pulled out a signal jammer and activated it. "This blocks surveillance devices. We have about 20 minutes before it looks suspicious." The plan she outlined was both elegant and audacious, to recover, preserve, and authenticate all the digital evidence that had been suppressed, deleted, or tampered with, creating an unassailable record of both the original misconduct and the subsequent cover-up. "We'll focus on 3 key areas," Alex explained. "First, recovering the deleted witness videos from the park incident. Second, accessing body cam footage that officers claimed was accidentally not recorded. Third, documenting the electronic trail of your frame-up and the broader conspiracy against you." For the deleted videos, Alex's team had already made progress. Using specialized recovery software, they had retrieved fragments of files from witnesses' phones, even those that had been seemingly deleted. "When you delete something, it doesn't actually vanish," Alex explained. "The space is just marked as available for new data. If it hasn't been overwritten, we can often reconstruct it." By combining partial recoveries from multiple devices, they had assembled a nearly complete record of the park incident, including clear footage of Officer Cunningham lifting Zora's skirt with his baton. The body cameras presented a greater challenge. Officers claimed they weren't recording, but that's not how the technology works, Alex said. These systems automatically activate and buffer continuously. Even when officers think they've prevented, recording, metadata, and fragments remain on the department servers. Working with a sympathetic IT specialist inside the department, Digital Justice had identified the relevant timestamp signatures and server locations. "We need to move quickly," Alex warned. "They're planning a system-wide upgrade next week that will conveniently erase all archival footage." The most damning evidence came from the department's own internal communications. The encrypted messages recovered from the anonymous USB drive formed a partial record, but Alex's team had expanded it dramatically. They used department devices. 4 communications they thought were secure, she explained with professional disdain. Rookie mistake. The decoded messages revealed not just the planning of Zora's frame-up, but a comprehensive campaign orchestrated at the highest levels of the department. Each piece of evidence was carefully authenticated, using digital forensic techniques, time-stamped, and secured in multiple redundant locations beyond the reach of those who would destroy it. "We're creating what we call a kill-proof evidence vault," Alex explained. "Distributed across secure servers worldwide with blockchain verification, Even if they manage to compromise one location, the evidence survives. As digital justice worked, the police department grew increasingly aware that their digital security had been breached. System administrators noticed unusual access patterns. Security protocols were hastily upgraded. An internal cyber investigation launched to identify the source of the leaks. "They know something's happening, but not exactly what," Alex reported during a secure meeting. "We need to accelerate our timeline." The department's next move was predictable, but nonetheless effective. A complete shutdown of all electronic systems for emergency maintenance. Evidence that had not yet been secured became instantly inaccessible. "They're burning down their own house to kill the spiders," Alex observed grimly. "But we expected this. Now we implement Plan B." The cat-and-mouse game escalated. Digital. Justice members reported surveillance vans outside their homes. 2 members had their apartments searched on flimsy pretexts. Another was arrested for an outstanding parking ticket from 3 years prior. The department was hunting them, methodically eliminating potential sources of the breach. Time was running critically short. The evidence they had secured was substantial, but still incomplete. Critical server access was needed to retrieve the final pieces confirming the highest-level authorization of the conspiracy. "We need the commissioner's electronic signature on the operation orders," Alex insisted. "Without it, they'll claim it was just rogue officers." The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. An anonymous email arrived containing administrative credentials for the police department's secure network, along with specific file locations for the commissioner's communications. The sender identified themselves only as someone who still believes in the badge's true meaning. With these credentials, Digital Justice completed their evidence compilation just hours before the department's systems came back online, with all historical data conveniently lost in the maintenance process. What the department didn't realize was that their attempts to destroy evidence had only strengthened its authenticity. The hasty system shutdown created its own forensic record, a timestamp of panic that corroborated the timeline of discovery and cover-up. The complete evidence package was now secured beyond their reach, a comprehensive digital record of corruption that could not be erased, altered, or denied. As Alex prepared to leave after their final secure meeting, she handed Zora an encrypted thumb drive. "Everything is here with instructions for release. Multiple copies exist in secure locations. Even if they come for all of us, the truth survives." She paused at the door. "What happens next is up to you. But whatever you decide, know that the record is preserved. History will know what really happened here, one way or another." The coordinated release of evidence began at precisely 9 a.m. on a Monday, a time chosen to maximize both media attention and official working hours. Digital Justice's meticulously organized files were simultaneously delivered to 17 different news organizations, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, the FBI, and the offices of selected city council members known for their integrity. The Boston Globe's website crashed within minutes as readers flooded to view the unedited footage of the park incident, finally seeing the clear, unambiguous evidence of Officer Cunningham lifting Zora's skirt and Officer Mathers mocking her. CNN's legal analyst, reviewing the footage live on air, stated bluntly, "This isn't a gray area. This is textbook police misconduct with clear sexual harassment components." Simultaneous with the media release, Digital Justice launched a live-stream event, projecting the evidence onto the facade of police headquarters itself. Citizens gathered by the hundreds, then thousands, as internal documents detailing the conspiracy against Zora scrolled across the building's stone exterior. Most devastating was the audio recording of Officers Cunningham and Mathers planning her frame-up, their casual laughter as they discussed planting evidence in her apartment, their explicit references to making her learn her place. At the emergency city council meeting hastily convened that afternoon, citizens lined up for hours to speak. When it was Zora's turn at the microphone, she didn't focus on her own case, but instead systematically presented evidence of similar misconduct against dozens of other victims, primarily black women, who had been silenced through intimidation, frame-ups, or simply the knowledge that no one would believe them against police testimony. The federal response was swift and unequivocal. Department of Justice officials arrived with court orders to secure evidence and department records. The police commissioner attempted to deny them access, ordering a full lockdown of headquarters and instructing IT staff to initiate emergency data purges. A federal judge countered with contempt charges and a direct order to cease all destruction of potential evidence. Meanwhile, Officers Cunningham and Mathers, recognizing the inevitability of serious consequences, attempted to flee the jurisdiction. Cunningham was apprehended at Logan Airport boarding a flight to Miami. Mathers made it as far as the New Hampshire border before state police, alerted by federal authorities, took him into custody. Inside police headquarters, department leadership held an emergency closed-door meeting to coordinate their response. Unknown to them, Digital Justice had maintained access to the conference room's audio-visual system, recording their desperate attempts to construct a narrative that would minimize institutional liability while sacrificing the individual officers as bad apples. "We need to get ahead of this," the commissioner insisted. "Full cooperation with the feds, but we control the message." This was isolated misconduct by individuals who violated department policies. The organization itself is sound. The strategic planning was interrupted by a junior officer who burst into the room without knocking. "Sir, Officers Jimenez and Taylor are talking to the feds. They're giving up everything. And I've just heard from dispatch that at least 5 more officers are asking for immunity deals." The blue wall of silence, that unwritten code that had protected police misconduct for generations, was crumbling in real time. The mayor, who had previously backed the police department unconditionally, held a press conference announcing an independent investigation by a special commission. The political calculation was transparent: abandon the sinking ship while pretending to have always supported reform. The city council, moving more decisively, established an emergency civilian oversight committee with actual subpoena power, a structural change that would have seemed impossible just days before. As the evidence continued to emerge, the pattern of abuse against black women became impossible to ignore. Cunningham and Mathers had targeted at least 27 women over a 5-year period, using nearly identical tactics: isolated stops, intrusive searches with sexual components, threats if they complained, and frame-ups if they persisted. Attorney Jasmine Lopez announced a class-action lawsuit representing multiple victims, with Zora as the lead plaintiff. "This case is about more than monetary damages," she declared at the courthouse steps. "It's about fundamental reform of a system that has enabled and protected predators with badges." For Zora personally, the immediate pressure finally eased. The fraudulent criminal charges against her were dismissed with prejudice. The ankle monitor was removed in a courthouse ceremony that turned impromptu as supporters gathered to cheer. Northwestern University issued a groveling apology, not only reinstating her, but establishing a named lecture series on civil rights and police accountability in her honor. But even as these preliminary victories accumulated, Zora recognized their limitations. The system was wounded but not transformed. The same power structures remained, temporarily chastened, but not fundamentally changed. The officers would face consequences, but the machinery that had protected them was adapting rather than reforming, preparing to close ranks again once public attention inevitably shifted to the next crisis. The battle's next phase would require not just exposing corruption, but reimagining justice itself. Northwestern University's apologetic reinstatement came with a hero's welcome. Students lined the path to Zora's classroom, applauding as she returned to teaching. Her constitutional law course, previously under-enrolled due to intimidation, now had a waiting list of over 100 students. The university president, who had so quickly moved to terminate her, now praised her courageous stand for fundamental rights and embodiment of academic integrity. Zora accepted the accolades with outward grace, but inward skepticism. Institutions, she had learned, shifted with prevailing winds rather than moral compasses. Chancellor Richard's health improved steadily once the impeachment threat disappeared. The state legislature, abruptly concerned about judicial independence, permanently shelved the investigation that had been so urgent just weeks earlier. Political calculations had changed. Suddenly, alignment with the discredited police department was a liability rather than an asset. The criminal proceedings against Officers Cunningham and Mathers progressed with unusual speed. The district attorney, facing re-election and sensing the public mood, charged them with multiple felonies: evidence tampering, witness intimidation, filing false reports, civil rights violations, and in Cunningham's case, sexual assault related to the skirt-lifting incident. Their bail hearing featured none of the leniency typically extended to law enforcement. The defendants represent a clear danger to the community, the prosecutor argued, successfully securing detention until trial. Media coverage portrayed the case as justice finally being served, a satisfying narrative of accountability that allowed the broader public to feel the system ultimately worked. When Zora was invited to testify before the state legislature about police accountability measures, the hearing room overflowed with supporters. Her testimony was precise, scholarly, and devastating, outlining not just her personal experience, but the structural failures that enabled such abuse. "This isn't about individual officers," she emphasized. "It's about systems designed to protect power rather than serve communities." Legislators nodded solemnly. The Police Accountability and Transparency Act was drafted with unprecedented speed, containing provisions for civilian oversight, body camera requirements, independent investigation of misconduct, and restrictions on qualified immunity. Editorials praised it as the most comprehensive police reform legislation in state history. Zora should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt a persistent unease, a sense that the apparent victory was somehow too clean, too easy after such determined opposition. Her instincts proved correct. 3 nights before the final vote, the bill underwent what the committee chair described as technical amendments to ensure legal viability. When the revised text appeared, Zora immediately recognized the sabotage. The civilian oversight provisions had been gutted, replaced with a review board that could only make non-binding recommendations. Body camera requirements remained, but with footage control given to the department rather than independent authorities. The independent investigation mechanism now required approval from the police commissioner before proceeding. Most critically, the qualified immunity restrictions had disappeared entirely. "They slaughtered it overnight," Zora told Elijah during an emergency strategy session. "The bill is now worse than nothing because it creates the illusion of reform while cementing the existing power structure." Research revealed that Senator James Morrison, who chaired the committee responsible for the changes, had received over $200,000 in police union support during his last campaign. The union's lobbying expenditures had tripled in the weeks leading up to the vote, with particular focus on legislators in vulnerable districts. Zora organized a press conference to expose the gutted legislation, but media attention had already begun to wane. A chemical plant explosion across the state dominated headlines. Cable news had moved on to a celebrity scandal. Social media algorithms promoted new outrages. The brief window when police accountability commanded public focus was closing rapidly. Even as the legislative reform effort faltered, the department announced its own comprehensive internal reforms with great fanfare. The changes were cosmetic at best: revised use of force policies that contained numerous exceptions, enhanced community engagement initiatives without enforcement mechanisms, implicit bias training with no accountability measures. The newly appointed police chief, Angela Martinez, was presented as the face of change, a Latina woman replacing the old guard. In public, Chief Martinez spoke passionately about rebuilding community trust and zero tolerance for misconduct. But officers privately reported that in closed-door meetings, she reassured them that her priority was protecting officers from excessive scrutiny and maintaining operational autonomy. Perhaps most disheartening was the fate of the criminal cases against Cunningham and Mathers. Despite overwhelming evidence, the district attorney offered a plea deal reducing all charges to misdemeanors with suspended sentences and no sex offender registration. "Pursuing trial presents significant challenges," the DA explained at a sparsely attended press conference. This resolution ensures some measure of accountability while conserving judicial resources. The department's insurance carrier quietly paid settlements to Zora and other victims, with carefully worded agreements that admitted no institutional wrongdoing. The narrative was being reshaped. A few bad officers had been removed, modest reforms implemented, compensation paid. The system had corrected itself. No fundamental change required. As public attention drifted, Zora faced a difficult realization. The exposure of corruption, while necessary, was insufficient to create lasting change. The systems of power had absorbed the blow, sacrificed expendable components, and reconstituted themselves in slightly altered form. True justice would require not just revealing the truth, but reimagining and rebuilding the institutions themselves. The settlement offer arrived by courier, $1.2 million in exchange for Zora's signature on a non-disclosure agreement that would prohibit her from discussing any aspect of her case publicly. "It's more than fair," the city's attorney insisted during their meeting. Most plaintiffs would consider this a major victory. Zora studied the document, noting the carefully crafted language designed to silence not just her personal story, but her analysis of the structural issues it revealed. "I'm declining," she said, returning the unsigned papers. "No amount of money justifies my silence." Her decision shifted the trajectory of both her case and her life. Rather than concluding her fight, she transformed it, expanding from a pursuit of personal justice to a campaign for fundamental system change. Northwestern University provided an institutional base for her efforts. Leveraging her reinstated position and newfound public profile, Zora established the Center for Police Accountability and Community Justice, a legal clinic where law students represented victims of misconduct while developing policy alternatives to traditional policing models. "We're not just documenting failures," she explained at the center's opening. "We're creating blueprints for something better." The blueprint began with education. Zora developed a comprehensive training program for civilian oversight personnel, addressing the critical gap between authority on paper and effective oversight in practice. The curriculum covered evidence evaluation, pattern recognition, investigative techniques, and resistance strategies against institutional sabotage. Graduates became force multipliers, implementing these approaches in oversight bodies across the state. Chancellor Richards, having recovered his health and his position, used his judicial authority to reform how courts handled police misconduct cases. His landmark ruling in Commonwealth v. Jeffries established stricter scrutiny for officer testimony and lowered barriers for plaintiffs seeking to establish patterns of departmental misconduct. "Courts must recognize their role in enabling or constraining abuse of power," he wrote, in the opinion that would be cited in jurisdictions nationwide. Digital justice transformed as well, evolving from hacktivist collective to legitimate transparency organization. Their public database tracking officer, complaints and departmental responses became an essential resource for communities, journalists, and policymakers. The technology that had exposed corruption now provided ongoing accountability through radical transparency. The women who had been victimized by officers Cunningham and Mathers formed an advocacy network supporting others through similar experiences. Their testimony before legislative committees in multiple states gave human faces to statistics about misconduct, making dismissal of their experiences politically untenable. Officers Cunningham and Mathers ultimately served minimal sentences, but their cases established important legal precedents. The court's finding that lifting a woman's skirt during a purported search constituted sexual assault rather than merely inappropriate procedure created new pathways for victims to seek both criminal and civil remedies. Working with sympathetic legislators, Zora helped draft new accountability legislation designed to resist the sabotage that had gutted previous reform efforts. The revised bills contained poison pill provisions, making it impossible to maintain the beneficial aspects for police departments while removing the accountability measures. The structural approach extended beyond legal and policy reforms to include coalition building between groups traditionally manipulated to oppose each other. Zora facilitated partnerships between academic institutions, community organizations, civil liberties advocates, and reform-minded officers who recognized that accountability ultimately protected the integrity of their profession. On the first anniversary of the Blackstone Park incident, Massachusetts Governor Maria Chen signed the Richards Accountability Act on the steps of the state capitol. The legislation established truly independent prosecutors for police misconduct cases, mandated body cameras with civilian access provisions, created enforceable duty to intervene requirements for officers witnessing misconduct, and limited qualified immunity in cases involving clear constitutional violations. This law recognizes that public safety and accountability are complementary, not contradictory, Governor Chen declared, with Zora standing at her side. Most significant was the election of Boston's new mayor, community organizer Darius Williams, who had made police accountability a central campaign promise. "We're not just changing policies," he announced after taking office. "We're changing culture, changing expectations, changing the fundamental relationship between institutions and the communities they serve." Walking through Blackstone Park. A year after her life had been upended there, Zora noticed a young black woman sitting on a bench reading, much as she had been that fateful day. Two police officers approached, and Zora instinctively tensed, prepared to intervene. But the interaction followed the new protocols. The officers maintained appropriate distance, clearly identified themselves and their purpose, and treated the woman with visible respect. On their uniforms were the accountability badges newly required by department policy, displaying their names, badge numbers, and the civilian complaint hotline. The woman showed them something on her phone. They thanked her and departed. No harassment, no humiliation, no abuse of power. Zora knew better than most that symbolic victories could mask underlying continuities of injustice. A single respectful interaction didn't prove systemic change. The work of transformation would require constant vigilance and struggle against institutions that inherently resisted accountability. But as she watched the woman return peacefully to her reading, Zora allowed herself to acknowledge what her relentless fight had accomplished. Not perfect justice, perhaps, but meaningful progress. Not complete transformation, but critical first steps. Not the end of the struggle, but proof that struggling mattered. She touched the scar on her wrist where the handcuffs had cut into her skin that day. Some wounds never fully healed, but they could become reminders of strength rather than trauma. What had begun as personal humiliation had catalyzed a movement larger than herself, and that perhaps was justice of a different kind. Zora's journey teaches us that true justice often requires more than exposing individual wrongdoing. It demands systemic transformation. When power protects itself, accountability becomes revolutionary. Her story shows how institutions will sacrifice individuals before accepting structural change, using every tool from character assassination to legal manipulation to maintain the status quo. We learn that isolation is a weapon used against those seeking justice, while community becomes their shield. Perhaps most importantly, this case reveals how privilege operates in two directions. First as protection, when her father's position temporarily shielded her, then as vulnerability, when that same connection became a target. The battle for justice is rarely quick or clean. It requires persistence through seemingly insurmountable obstacles and the courage to continue when every logical instinct says to surrender. Victory comes not in perfect resolution, but in meaningful progress that opens pathways for others. The final lesson is that true change happens not just through exposing corruption, but through the painstaking work of building better systems to replace broken ones. Have you ever witnessed injustice and faced the impossible choice between speaking up or protecting yourself? What would you have done in Zora's position when the entire system aligned against her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of fighting against racist power structures resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose difficult truths about justice in America. Remember, change begins when we refuse to accept that injustice is inevitable. Thank you for bearing witness to Zora's story. May it inspire you to stand firm when your own moment of truth arrives.